Captain Marcus Thompson had been flying commercial aircraft for Delta Airlines for 15 years when the world ended. Not with nuclear fire or natural disaster, but with something far more terrifying, a virus that turned the living into mindless, flesh-hungry monsters. It started in major cities, spreading faster than anyone could comprehend. Within 72 hours, Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport transformed from the world's busiest hub into a nightmare of screaming passengers and blood-stained terminals. Marcus was completing his pre-flight checklist for Flight 447 to Los Angeles when the first reports came through air traffic control. All aircraft, this is Atlanta Tower. We have a situation developing in Terminal C, multiple medical emergencies reported. The calm professionalism in the controller's voice carried an undercurrent of barely contained panic that made Marcus's stomach clench. Through the cockpit window, he watched baggage carts racing across the tarmac with unusual urgency. Airport security vehicles converged on the main terminal, their red and blue lights painting frantic patterns across the concrete. His co-pilot, Jennifer Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s with 10 years of flying experience, leaned forward in her seat. "Marcus, look at Gate B12. Marcus followed her gaze and felt his blood freeze. Passengers were streaming out of the jet bridge, not walking but running in pure terror. Some stumbled and fell, others helped the injured, but what caught his attention were the figures pursuing them. People moved with jerky, unnatural gaits, their clothes torn and stained with something dark that could only be blood. "Tower, Delta 447 requesting immediate departure clearance," Marcus spoke into his headset, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before them. The passenger boarding process had been halted 20 minutes ago when the first emergency alerts reached the gate agents. "Delta 447, stand by. All departures are currently suspended pending." The transmission cut to static, then silence. Jennifer grabbed Marcus's arm. "The terminal windows. Look at the terminal windows." The massive glass panels that normally showcased the busy interior of the airport now revealed scenes of absolute pandemonium. People pressed against the glass from inside, their faces contorted with terror as dark shapes moved behind them. Flight attendant Rachel Martinez burst into the cockpit, her usually immaculate uniform disheveled. "Captain, we need to get airborne now. Whatever's happening in there is spreading fast. I've got 53 passengers aboard, mostly business travelers and families with children. They're asking questions I can't answer." Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his life. "Jennifer, start engines. Rachel, secure the cabin and prepare for immediate departure. We're not waiting for clearance." His fingers flew across the controls, bypassing standard procedures that suddenly seemed irrelevant in the face of what appeared to be complete societal collapse. The Boeing 737 roared to life as Marcus taxied toward the runway without authorization. Other aircraft sat abandoned on the tarmac, their crews either fled or trapped in the terminal chaos. Through his headset, he caught fragments of panicked communications from other pilots. Creatures overran the gate. Crew missing. Massive casualties in Terminal A. As they reached the runway threshold, Marcus saw something that would haunt his dreams forever. Emergency vehicles surrounded a crashed airport shuttle, but the paramedics weren't helping victims, they were running from them. Figures in torn paramedic uniforms stumbled after their former colleagues with arms outstretched, mouths gaping in silent screams. "Delta 447, you are not cleared for takeoff. Return the gate immediately." The tower's voice crackled through the radio, but Marcus could hear screaming in the background. "Tower, negative. We have passengers aboard and the terminal is compromised. Declaring emergency authority." Marcus pushed the throttles forward, feeling the familiar surge of power as the aircraft accelerated down runway 26 left. Jennifer monitored the engine parameters while keeping watch for any obstacles. "V1. Rotate," she called out. Marcus pulled back on the yoke, and Flight 447 lifted off into the afternoon sky just as smoke began rising from the terminal building. As Atlanta fell away beneath them, Marcus realized they had escaped one nightmare only to face another question: where could they possibly land in a world that was rapidly losing its humanity? The radio crackled with distress calls from cities across the country. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, everywhere reported the same impossible situation. 53 souls depended on his decisions now, and Marcus Thompson was about to discover that being a pilot in the zombie apocalypse meant becoming something he'd never trained for, a leader in humanity's fight for survival. 3 hours into what should have been a routine flight to Los Angeles, Marcus received confirmation that the nightmare had spread nationwide. LAX Tower reported significant security incidents and had suspended all incoming traffic indefinitely. Chicago O'Hare had gone completely silent 20 minutes earlier. Every major airport they tried to contact either didn't respond or painted the same horrifying picture of chaos and infection. Jennifer worked furiously with flight charts and fuel calculations spread across her lap. "We've got maybe 2 hours of fuel remaining at current consumption. We need to find somewhere to put down soon." Her voice remained professional, but Marcus caught the tremor of fear underneath. Rachel appeared in the cockpit doorway again, her face pale but determined. "Captain, the passengers are getting restless. The business travelers keep demanding updates, and the families with children are starting to panic. I've told them we're experiencing air traffic delays, but they're not buying it anymore." Through the cabin door, Marcus could hear raised voices and crying children. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman traveling to visit her grandchildren, had been asking increasingly pointed questions about why they couldn't contact the ground. David Chen, a tech executive who'd been loudly complaining about missing his important meeting, was now demanding to speak with the captain directly. "Give me the intercom," Marcus decided. He'd never lied to passengers before, but he'd also never faced the complete collapse of civilization. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to unprecedented weather conditions affecting multiple airports, we're being rerouted to an alternate destination. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened while we navigate this situation." It wasn't entirely a lie, the weather of society had certainly changed dramatically. Jennifer pointed to her navigation display. "What about Billings, Montana? Small airport, less likely to be completely overrun. We might find fuel and a safe place to wait this out." Her finger traced their potential route across the electronic map. Marcus considered their options. Flying towards smaller, more isolated airports seemed logical, but they were essentially flying blind into an unknown situation. Every mile took them further from major population centers, but also further from resources and help. The radio suddenly crackled to life with a transmission that made both pilots freeze. "Any aircraft monitoring this frequency, this is Air Force Colonel James Mitchell aboard a KC-135 tanker. We are establishing a temporary command post at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. If you are carrying civilian passengers and need fuel or sanctuary, we can provide assistance. Repeat, Offutt is secure and operational." Marcus and Jennifer exchanged glances. Military bases would likely have better defenses against whatever was happening, but trusting their passengers' lives to strangers felt like an enormous gamble. Still, with fuel running low and no other viable options, it seemed like their best hope. "Colonel Mitchell, this is Delta Flight 447, Captain Marcus Thompson. We're a commercial 737 with 53 passengers aboard, departed Atlanta approximately 3 hours ago. Requesting permission to divert to Offutt for fuel and shelter." The response came immediately. "Delta 447, you are cleared to proceed to Offutt. Be advised, maintain radio silence except for emergency communications. We've observed that infected individuals seem attracted to loud noises, including aircraft engines. Our base perimeter is secure, but we're taking no chances." Infected individuals. The clinical term somehow made the situation more real and more terrifying than the word zombie that Marcus had been trying not to think. Jennifer began plotting their course to Nebraska while Marcus announced the change to their increasingly anxious passengers. Rachel worked to calm the cabin, distributing extra snacks and drinks while dodging more pointed questions about their destination. As they flew over the Missouri countryside, Marcus spotted something that confirmed his worst fears. A small town below showed clear signs of destruction, buildings burning, abandoned vehicles scattered across roads, and most chilling of all, groups of figures moving through the streets with that same jerky, unnatural gait he'd witnessed at the Atlanta airport. "Jennifer, are you seeing this?" She pressed her face to the window. "It's everywhere. How did it spread so fast?" The radio provided part of the answer as they monitored emergency frequencies. Military communications painted a picture of coordinated attacks in major cities, followed by rapid spread through transportation networks. Airports, train stations, bus terminals, anywhere people gathered in large numbers had become ground zero for the infection's spread. As Offutt Air Force Base appeared on the horizon, Marcus found himself praying for the first time in years. They were about to trust their lives to strangers in a world where trust itself had become a luxury few could afford. Offutt Air Force Base stretched across the Nebraska landscape like a fortress of normalcy in an increasingly insane world. As Flight 447 approached the runway, Marcus could see military vehicles positioned strategically around the perimeter, their crews maintaining vigilant watch. Razor wire had been hastily installed along sections of fencing, and guard towers that normally stood empty were now manned with armed personnel. "Delta 447, this is Offutt Tower. You are cleared for landing on runway 12. Be advised, we will have an escort team meet your aircraft upon landing. Please keep your passengers seated until we can secure the area." The controller's voice carried the crisp efficiency of military training, but also an underlying tension that spoke of long hours and enormous pressure. Marcus guided the Boeing 737 down through clear skies, grateful for the straightforward approach after hours of navigating through uncertainty. As the wheels touched down on the concrete runway, he felt a small measure of relief for the first time since leaving Atlanta. They had fuel, they had shelter, and most importantly, they had arrived somewhere with people trained to handle crisis situations. Jennifer completed the shutdown checklist while Marcus prepared to address their passengers one final time before deplaning. Through the cockpit windows, they watched a convoy of military vehicles approach their aircraft, 2 Humvees flanking a passenger bus, all carrying soldiers in full combat gear. Colonel Mitchell turned out to be a weathered man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had clearly seen too much in recent days. He boarded Flight 447 with 2 armed escorts, but his demeanor remained calm and professional as he addressed the confused and frightened passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Colonel James Mitchell, United States Air Force. I know this situation is confusing and frightening, but I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you." He paused, letting his authoritative presence settle over the cabin. The United States is currently experiencing a national emergency involving a highly contagious pathogen that affects human behavior. Major population centers have been compromised, and we are working to establish safe zones for civilian populations. The cabin erupted in voices, questions, demands, and barely controlled panic. David Chen stood up despite Rachel's protests. "What kind of pathogen? Are you talking about some kind of biological weapon? I demand to know what's really happening." Colonel Mitchell's expression didn't change. "Sir, I understand your concerns, but right now my priority is getting you and your fellow passengers to safety. We have temporary housing facilities on base where you can rest while we assess the broader situation." Mrs. Patterson raised a trembling hand. "Colonel, my family in California, are they?" "Ma'am, we're working to establish communication with all regions. Once we get you settled, we'll do everything we can to help you contact your loved ones." His voice softened slightly, revealing the compassion beneath his military bearing. The debriefing process took place in a converted aircraft hangar that had been hastily transformed into a refugee processing center. Cots lined one section, while tables with military personnel conducting interviews occupied another. Marcus, Jennifer, and Rachel found themselves separated from their passengers as they underwent what Colonel Mitchell called essential personnel evaluation. "Captain Thompson, your aircraft and crew represent valuable assets in our current situation," Colonel Mitchell explained as they sat in a small office that smelled of coffee and disinfectant. "We've lost most commercial aviation capabilities, and pilots with your experience are desperately needed." Marcus leaned forward in his metal folding chair. "Needed for what, exactly?" "Search and rescue operations, supply runs to isolated communities, personnel transport between secure facilities. The infrastructure we took for granted is gone, Captain. Roads are blocked or too dangerous to travel. Rail systems have been compromised. Aviation is our lifeline now. Jennifer spoke up. What about our passengers? They didn't sign up for any of this. We'll take excellent care of them. They'll be housed, fed, and protected while we work to establish larger safe zones. But I won't lie to you, the world they knew is gone. The infection rate appears to be nearly 100% in urban areas, with rural regions faring only slightly better. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 53 people had trusted him to get them safely to Los Angeles, and instead he delivered them to a military base in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. The irony wasn't lost on him that in trying to save their lives, he might have trapped them in a war they never chose to fight. We need time to process this, Marcus said finally. And we need guarantees about our passengers' safety and treatment. Colonel Mitchell nodded. Understood. Take tonight to rest and think it over. But Captain, I need you to understand something, we're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting to preserve what's left of civilization itself. And that fight requires people willing to risk everything for strangers they've never met. The converted hangar that served as their temporary quarters buzzed with anxious conversations throughout the night. Marcus lay on his narrow cot, listening to the whispered fears and fragmented prayers of his passengers scattered throughout the dimly lit space. Mrs. Patterson quietly sobbed for grandchildren she might never see again, while David Chen paced restlessly near the exit doors, muttering about lawsuits and demanding answers no one could provide. Around midnight, the base sirens wailed once, a short, sharp blast that sent everyone scrambling upright on their cots. Colonel Mitchell's voice echoed through the hangar's PA system. This is not a drill. All civilian personnel remain in designated areas. Military personnel report to stations immediately. Through the small windows high up on the hangar walls, Marcus could see spotlights sweeping across the perimeter fence. The distant sound of gunfire, short, controlled bursts, punctuated the night air. Jennifer appeared beside his cot, her face pale in the emergency lighting. Sounds like they're testing the defenses, she whispered. Rachel joined them, having spent the evening trying to comfort the families with children. The little ones are terrified. I've been telling them it's just training exercises, but they're not stupid. They know something's very wrong. The sounds of conflict continued for nearly an hour before silence returned. Colonel Mitchell never provided an explanation, but the increased security presence the next morning told its own story. More guards patrolled the perimeter, and several sections of fence had been reinforced with additional razor wire and motion sensors. At breakfast in the base cafeteria, Marcus found himself seated across from Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez, a helicopter pilot who'd been conducting reconnaissance flights over the surrounding area. Her haunted expression spoke of things no training manual could have prepared her for. It's spreading faster than we initially calculated, she said quietly, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate without eating. Small towns that were clear yesterday are showing signs of infection today. We think they're following major transportation routes, highways, railways, even hiking trails. Marcus leaned forward. How are they coordinating? I thought these things were supposed to be mindless. That's what we assumed too. But there's some kind of pattern to their movement. They seem to respond to each other somehow, like they're communicating without actually communicating. Groups converge on survivor settlements with tactical precision that's frankly terrifying. The implications sent a chill down Marcus's spine. If the infected could coordinate their attacks, nowhere would remain safe for long. Military bases, remote towns, even aircraft in flight could potentially become targets if the infection continued to evolve. Colonel Mitchell approached their table with a cup of coffee and a manila folder thick with documents. Captain Thompson, I hope you slept better than I did. We need to discuss your next assignment. Marcus looked around the cafeteria at his passengers eating breakfast, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy despite their circumstances. What kind of assignment? There's a research facility in Colorado, the Centers for Disease Control Mountain Laboratory. They went dark 3 days ago, but their last transmission indicated they had critical information about the infection's origin and possible countermeasures. Colonel Mitchell opened the folder, revealing satellite photographs and technical specifications. We need someone to fly a small team in, extract whatever data they can find, and hopefully bring back any survivors. Jennifer studied the photographs over Marcus's shoulder. That's mountainous terrain. Weather conditions can change rapidly, and if the facility is compromised. It's dangerous, I won't pretend otherwise, the colonel admitted. But the alternative is waiting here while this infection spreads to every corner of the continent. Intelligence suggests we have maybe 2 weeks before the remaining military installations become unsustainable. Marcus felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders. Every decision now carried life-or-death consequences not just for himself and his crew, but for the passengers who'd trusted him to keep them safe. But perhaps keeping them safe meant taking risks that could end the nightmare entirely. What aircraft would we be using? Modified C-130 Hercules. 4-engine turboprop, designed for short-field operations. You'd have a 5-person team, 2 CDC specialists, 2 military escorts, and yourself as pilot. Lieutenant Rodriguez here would serve as co-pilot. Sarah Rodriguez nodded grimly. I volunteered. If there's a chance this mission could help stop what's happening out there, I'm willing to risk it. Marcus looked across the cafeteria at Mrs. Patterson, who was sharing photographs of her grandchildren with other passengers. At David Chen, who despite his abrasive personality was now helping distribute supplies to families with small children. At Rachel, who'd spent the night comforting strangers as if they were her own family. These people deserved better than hiding in a military base while the world burned. They deserved a chance at reclaiming their lives, their futures, their hope. And perhaps that chance lay in a dark research facility somewhere in the Colorado mountains. When do we leave? The C-130 Hercules sat on the tarmac like a gray metal beast, its 4 turboprops silent in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus completed his walk-around inspection by flashlight, noting the additional fuel tanks and emergency medical supplies that had been loaded overnight. The aircraft's military designation was painted in bold letters along the fuselage, but everyone knew this mission operated far outside normal military protocols. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the senior CDC researcher, supervised the loading of specialized equipment containers that hummed with electronic cooling systems. Her partner, Dr. Michael Chen, no relation to passenger David Chen, reviewed biological containment protocols with almost obsessive attention to detail. Both scientists wore expressions of grim determination mixed with barely concealed fear. The military escorts, Staff Sergeant Tommy Williams and Corporal Maria Santos, checked their weapons and equipment with the methodical precision of soldiers who understood they might be walking into hell. Williams, a veteran of 3 overseas deployments, admitted this mission felt more dangerous than anything he'd faced in Afghanistan. Lieutenant Rodriguez completed her pre-flight checklist in the co-pilot seat, her movements sharp and efficient. Weather report shows clear skies for the first half of our route, but there's a storm system moving through the Colorado Rockies. We'll need to time our approach carefully. Marcus studied the navigation charts one final time. The CDC facility was located in a remote valley accessible only by a single mountain road that satellite imagery showed was blocked by abandoned vehicles. Their landing zone would be a narrow grass strip originally designed for supply deliveries, surrounded by peaks that rose over 12,000 feet above sea level. Colonel Mitchell appeared at the aircraft's cargo door carrying a sealed briefcase and a satellite phone. Final intelligence update, Captain. We lost contact with 3 more installations overnight, Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs, the NORAD facility at Cheyenne Mountain, and Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. Whatever you find at that research facility, it might be our last chance to understand what we're fighting. The implications hung heavy in the recycled air of the cargo compartment. If military installations with the highest security clearances and best defensive positions were falling, how long could Offutt remain secure? How long before there was nowhere left to run? Dr. Vasquez spoke up from her position near the equipment containers. Colonel, what's our extraction protocol if the facility is compromised? You have 48 hours maximum. If we don't hear from you by then, we'll assume the mission failed and redirect our resources to other priorities." His clinical tone couldn't quite mask the human cost of such a decision. As they taxied toward the runway, Marcus caught sight of the passenger hangar through his side window. Several figures stood pressed against the glass, watching their departure. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand in a small wave, perhaps understanding that their fate now depended on the success of this desperate mission. The takeoff was smooth despite the heavy cargo load, and the C-130 climbed steadily into the pre-dawn sky. Below them, the lights of Omaha had been reduced to scattered points of illumination, while vast dark patches marked areas where power grids had failed or been deliberately shut down. 3 hours into the flight, they encountered their first sign of the infection's spread. Dr. Chen, monitoring radio frequencies from his position in the cargo area, picked up a distress call from a small airport in Kansas. "Emergency, emergency, this is Salina Regional Airport. We have multiple casualties, they're in the terminal, oh God, they're trying to get into the tower." The transmission dissolved into static punctuated by screaming and the sound of breaking glass. Marcus and Rodriguez exchanged glances but maintained their heading. They had a mission to complete, and stopping to help would only add to the casualty count. As they approached the Colorado mountains, the weather began to deteriorate exactly as predicted. Turbulence bounced the heavy aircraft around like a toy, while ice began forming on the wing leading edges despite the de-icing systems running at full capacity. "There, 11 o'clock low," Rodriguez pointed through the windscreen. "That should be the facility." The CDC Mountain Laboratory looked like something from a science fiction movie, a complex of white buildings connected by enclosed walkways, built into the side of a mountain slope. Solar panels and communication dishes dotted the rooftops, while a helicopter landing pad showed signs of recent use. But something was wrong. No lights showed in any of the buildings, and the access road that should have been plowed clear was buried under what looked like deliberate debris barriers. Most disturbing of all, dark stains that could only be blood marked the snow around the main entrance. Marcus began his approach to the grass landing strip, fighting crosswinds that threatened to push them into the surrounding peaks. The narrow valley channeled the wind into vicious downdrafts and updrafts that made precision flying nearly impossible. Landing gear down and locked, Rodriguez called out. Field elevation 7,600 feet. The C-130 touched down hard on the frozen grass, bouncing once before settling into a ground roll that ate up most of the available runway length. As they taxied toward the facility, everyone aboard stared through the windows at a scene that would haunt their nightmares forever. The CDC Mountain Laboratory had become a tomb, and they were about to walk inside. The silence that greeted them outside the C-130 was absolute and unnerving. No wind whistled through the mountain peaks, no birds called from the surrounding forest, even their footsteps seemed muffled in the thin air at 7,000 feet. The facility's main entrance doors hung open like the mouth of a corpse, revealing darkness beyond that their flashlights couldn't fully penetrate. Staff Sergeant Williams took point with his rifle raised, followed by Corporal Santos covering their rear. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chen stayed close together in the middle of the formation, their equipment cases containing sensitive detection instruments that would hopefully reveal what had happened here. Marcus and Lieutenant Rodriguez brought up the rear, both carrying sidearms they hoped they wouldn't need to use. The reception area showed signs of hasty evacuation, papers scattered across desks, coffee cups still sitting beside computer keyboards, chairs pushed back as if their occupants had stood up suddenly and never returned. But no bodies, no blood, no obvious signs of violence. Whatever had happened here seemed almost clinical in its efficiency. Dr. Chen consulted a facility map printed on emergency paper. The main research laboratories are 2 levels down. That's where they would have kept the primary samples and data regarding the infection. The elevator wasn't functioning, forcing them to use emergency stairs that descended into increasing darkness. Their flashlight beams revealed concrete walls lined with emergency procedures and evacuation protocols that had apparently proven inadequate when crisis actually struck. Level B1 housed administrative offices and conference rooms, all empty but showing the same signs of sudden abandonment. Level B2, however, told a different story entirely. The heavy security door that should have required keycard access stood slightly ajar, its electronic lock mechanism showing scorch marks that suggested forced entry from the inside. Williams tested the door carefully before pushing it open with his rifle barrel. The laboratory beyond had been thoroughly destroyed, but not by infected creatures. Equipment lay neatly disassembled, computer hard drives removed with surgical precision, and specimen storage units had been deliberately emptied and sterilized. "Someone cleaned this place out," Santos observed, running her fingers along surfaces that had been wiped down with industrial solvents. This wasn't random destruction or panic. Somebody knew exactly what they were looking for. Dr. Vasquez examined the remains of a biological containment unit, her face growing increasingly pale in the harsh LED light. These storage protocols, they were designed to contain Class 4 pathogens. Whatever they were studying here required the highest level of biological safety measures. A sound from the far end of the laboratory made everyone freeze, a soft tapping, rhythmic and deliberate. Williams signaled for silence while Santos moved to flank whatever was making the noise. Marcus felt his heart rate spike as they approached a door marked Containment Suite, authorized personnel only. The tapping continued, accompanied now by what sounded like whispered conversation, too faint to understand but definitely human in origin. Williams positioned himself beside the door frame and nodded to Santos, who turned the handle and pushed it open in one swift motion. Inside, they found Dr. Patricia Wong, the facility's senior researcher, huddled beside a backup computer terminal. She was alive but clearly traumatized, her laboratory coat torn and stained, her face gaunt from days without proper food or rest. When their flashlights illuminated her, she shielded her eyes and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Thank God. I thought they'd come back for me." Dr. Vasquez knelt beside her colleague, checking for injuries while asking gentle questions. "Patricia, what happened here? Where is everyone else?" Dr. Wong's response chilled everyone in the room. "They came 3 days ago. Military unit, but not like any I'd seen before. They had access codes, knew exactly where everything was stored. They took all the research data, all the biological samples, even the backup drives." "Military unit?" Williams stepped forward, his training focused on tactical details. "What branch? How many personnel?" "Maybe a dozen soldiers, but their uniforms, something wasn't right. No unit patches, no name tags. And their leader, he knew things about our research that weren't in any reports. Things we'd never put in writing." Dr. Chen had been examining the computer terminal Dr. Wong was using. "Patricia, were you able to preserve any of the research data?" She nodded weakly. "I hit a single drive before they arrived. It contains everything, the infection's genetic structure, its transmission vectors, and most importantly, our preliminary work on potential countermeasures." Marcus exchanged glances with Rodriguez. If what Dr. Wong claimed was true, they might actually have a chance to develop some kind of treatment or vaccine. But the implications of a rogue military unit with inside knowledge were equally disturbing. "We need to get you out of here," Rodriguez said. "How long since this military unit left?" "Yesterday afternoon. But before they left, their leader told me something." Dr. Wong's voice dropped to an almost inaudible whisper. "He said the infection wasn't an accident. He said it was just the beginning." The facility's emergency lighting suddenly flickered and went out, plunging them into complete darkness except for their flashlights. In the distance, they could hear the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors approaching the mountain valley. Someone was coming back. The helicopter's rotors grew louder as Marcus led the team through darkened corridors toward their only exit. Dr. Wong moved slowly despite their urgency, her days of hiding and minimal food having weakened her considerably. Behind them, the sound of boots on concrete echoed through the facility's ventilation system, multiple individuals moving with military precision through the same route they'd taken to reach the lower levels. "They're inside," Williams whispered into his radio. "Multiple hostiles, armed and coordinated. We need extraction now." Rodriguez checked her watch in the dim light of their emergency flashlights. The C-130 needs at least 10 minutes to start engines and taxi into position. We have to buy time somehow. Santos had taken position at the stairwell entrance, her rifle trained on the darkness below. Footsteps stopped. They're waiting for something, probably trying to determine our exact position. Dr. Vasquez helped support Dr. Wong while Dr. Chen secured the precious data drive that might represent humanity's last hope for understanding the infection. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on everyone as they realized they were trapped between unknown hostiles in a mountain wilderness that offered no sanctuary. The facility's public address system crackled to life, filled with static but carrying a voice that was unnaturally calm given the circumstances. Dr. Patricia Wong, we know you're still in the facility. We also know you've been joined by rescue personnel. There's no need for anyone to be harmed if you simply surrender the remaining research materials. Dr. Wong's face went pale. That's him. The leader of the unit that took everything else. Marcus made a command decision. We're not surrendering anything to people who won't identify themselves. Santos, Williams, can you provide cover while we move to the surface? Williams nodded grimly. We'll do what we can. But if they have the facility blueprints, they might know alternate routes we don't. The team began moving up the emergency stairs, their flashlights creating dancing shadows that could conceal threats at every turn. The helicopter outside had landed, its rotors winding down to idle, which meant reinforcements were now on the ground between them and their aircraft. At the B-1 level, Santos held up her hand and pointed to fresh footprints in the dust, boot prints that were different from their own, leading toward the main exit. Someone had anticipated their route and was positioning for an ambush. Service corridor, Dr. Wong whispered, pointing to a maintenance door they'd passed earlier. It connects to the loading dock on the north side. Less obvious exit point. The narrow maintenance corridor forced them to move in single file, with Williams leading and Santos covering their rear. Pipes and electrical conduits lined the walls, creating numerous blind spots where threats could hide. The air grew colder as they approached the loading dock, suggesting the external door had been compromised. Rodriguez checked her radio. Alpha Base, this is Rescue 1. We have the package and one survivor, but we're encountering organized resistance. What's our backup extraction plan? Static filled the radio channel before Colonel Mitchell's voice broke through. Rescue 1, we're tracking multiple aircraft approaching your position. Unknown configuration and intent. Suggest immediate extraction by any means necessary. The loading dock opened onto a concrete platform that overlooked the mountain valley. Their C-130 sat on the grass strip 800 meters away, its engines now running and propellers spinning in preparation for immediate departure. But between them and safety, 6 armed figures in unmarked military gear had positioned themselves with clear fields of fire. More disturbing than the tactical situation was what Marcus observed through his binoculars. The hostile personnel moved with the same jerky, unnatural coordination he'd witnessed from infected individuals, but they retained enough cognitive function to use weapons and communicate. Whatever the infection had become, it was evolving in ways that made survival even more unlikely. Enhanced infected, Dr. Wong confirmed his worst fears. We theorized this might happen if the pathogen encountered certain genetic markers. Retention of higher brain functions while losing normal human behavioral constraints. Dr. Chen studied the data on his portable tablet. According to this research, exposure to specific electromagnetic frequencies can temporarily disrupt their coordination. Do we have anything that might generate the right wavelength? Santos pointed to a radio transmission tower on the facility's roof. Emergency broadcast system. If we can get to the communications room and boost the signal strength. An explosion echoed across the valley as one of the approaching aircraft fired a missile that narrowly missed their C-130. Rodriguez grabbed her radio. Alpha Base, we're taking fire. Unknown aircraft are engaging our extraction bird. The pilot of their C-130 responded immediately. Rescue team, I'm taking off now before they destroy us on the ground. You'll need to find alternate extraction. Marcus watched their only way home disappear into the cloudy sky, chased by 2 unmarked helicopters that continued firing air-to-air missiles. They were stranded in a mountain facility surrounded by enhanced infected who retained human intelligence but had lost human compassion. Dr. Wong clutched the data drive that might save humanity, while around them a new type of war was beginning, one where the enemy could think like humans but had no remaining humanity to constrain their actions. The communications room on the facility's third floor became their fortress as night fell over the Colorado mountains. Marcus had never imagined he'd be conducting urban warfare in a research laboratory, but the skills he'd learned in Air Force survival training proved surprisingly relevant when facing enhanced infected who could plan tactical assaults. Dr. Chen worked frantically to boost the emergency broadcast system's power output while Dr. Wong analyzed the pathogen data on her tablet. Their hope was that electromagnetic interference might disrupt whatever neural pathways allowed the enhanced infected to coordinate their attacks, but time was running short as systematic sounds of forced entry echoed through the building below. Santos had barricaded the stairwell access points with laboratory furniture, creating choke points that would force attackers to approach predictably. Williams maintained radio contact with Colonel Mitchell, reporting their situation and requesting extraction options that seemed increasingly impossible given the air superiority demonstrated by the unknown aircraft. "Got something," Dr. Chen announced as the radio tower's transmission array came online. Broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously. If their neural coordination relies on bioelectric patterns, this should create enough interference to disrupt group behavior. The effect was immediate and disturbing. Through the communications room's reinforced windows, they could see figures in military gear stumbling around the facility's exterior, their previous coordination replaced by confused, individual movement patterns. But the disruption also revealed how many enhanced infected had surrounded the building. At least 20 figures now moved independently through the snow. Dr. Wong looked up from her research. The electromagnetic interference won't last long. Their neural pathways will adapt within hours, possibly becoming stronger than before. We need to use this window to escape. Rodriguez had been monitoring aviation frequencies and picked up a transmission that offered unexpected hope. Military aircraft approaching from the south.